The morning sun cast a gentle warmth over the neighborhood as Malcolm Edwards walked slowly down the tree-lined street. Dressed in a gray hoodie, clean jeans, and sneakers, he held a clipboard in one hand and a coffee in the other. He wasn't in a rush, this was his time to observe. This block, once filled with boarded-up homes and forgotten memories, had begun to breathe again. Windows gleamed. Gardens bloomed. Children's chalk drawings adorned the sidewalks. To a casual observer, Malcolm might have looked like any curious passerby. But to Malcolm, every corner of this neighborhood told a piece of his story. He stopped in front of 216 Linden Avenue, a house that once belonged to his grandmother. He remembered the creaky front steps, the way she'd wave from the porch every evening at 6 o'clock, the smell of cornbread in the summer. Now, the porch was restored, the wood fresh and sealed. A new family would be moving in next week, a young couple with their first child. Malcolm smiled to himself. He took a note on his clipboard. Fence still needs repainting. Notify contractor. Behind him, a white SUV rolled slowly past, its driver, a woman in her late 40s, eyeing him curiously. Malcolm noticed, but didn't react. He was used to this. Used to being watched, especially in spaces people didn't expect him to belong. He continued his walk, pausing occasionally to check landscaping, speak briefly with a gardener, or glance at the next renovation project. 10 homes on this block had been purchased and restored under his leadership. He didn't just own property here, he cared about what it became. To him, this wasn't just real estate. It was redemption. As he reached the end of the block, Malcolm looked around, at what had changed, and what hadn't. He didn't know yet that one window was watching him not with admiration, but with suspicion. That one call would turn a peaceful morning into something heavier. But for now, he sipped his coffee, made another note, and continued his quiet walk through the street he had saved. Inside a freshly painted house with crisp white shutters and granite countertops, Claire Whitman stood at the window, peering through the narrow slats of her blinds. She held her phone loosely in her hand, half-finished tea cooling on the kitchen island behind her. Her brow was furrowed, her lips pursed. She had just moved into the neighborhood 3 weeks ago, a quiet, rising suburb marketed as up-and-coming with character. The listing had called it historic. She had called it affordable. She was still learning the rhythm of the block, the people, the pace. So when she saw a tall black man walking slowly from house to house with a clipboard, pausing, scribbling notes, and checking his phone every so often, she felt uneasy. She told herself it wasn't about race, it was about safety. The man hadn't knocked on any doors. He hadn't greeted any neighbors. He looked like he was scoping out the area. Who takes notes in front of other people's houses? Her eyes narrowed as he stopped in front of her neighbor's property and stared for what felt like too long. Claire felt the familiar twist of nervous instinct, the one her mother called a woman's sense. Without a second thought, she picked up the phone. Non-emergency police line, how can I help you? Yes, hi, she said quickly. I'm not sure if this is important, but there's a man walking up and down the street, writing things down. I don't recognize him. He's just lingering. Could someone check it out? The dispatcher took down the details. Claire gave her name, her address, and a short description: black male, hoodie, jeans, clipboard, about 6 feet tall. The dispatcher confirmed a patrol unit would be sent. Claire hung up and returned to the blinds. She watched the man reach a house 2 doors down, then pull out keys and unlock the front door. That confused her. Wait, why does he have keys? But she shook it off. Anyone could fake that. Maybe he was squatting. Maybe he had stolen the keys. Maybe. She stopped herself. Don't overthink it. You did the right thing. She stepped back from the window, suddenly aware of how tightly she'd been holding her phone. Her knuckles were pale. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint whoop of a siren, not urgent, but close. She exhaled and straightened her blouse. If it's nothing, fine. If it's something, then I stopped it before it got worse. But what she didn't know was that the man she'd just reported didn't just have keys, he had deeds. To half the homes on this block. Including hers. And that call? It was about to blow her assumptions wide open. Malcolm had just stepped into the entryway of house number 220 when he heard the low rumble of tires on gravel and the soft chirp of a car radio. Through the open door behind him, he spotted the unmistakable blue and white of a patrol vehicle pulling up at the curb. He sighed. Not surprised. Not shaken. Just tired. The officer stepped out, a middle-aged white man with aviator sunglasses and a stiff posture. Hand on his belt, he approached slowly but with authority. "Morning," the officer said, eyes scanning the clipboard, the open door, then back to Malcolm. "Can I ask what you're doing on this property?" Malcolm kept his voice even, respectful. "I'm conducting a routine inspection. I'm the owner." The officer blinked once. "Do you have ID?" Malcolm handed over his driver's license and, intentionally, a sleek matte black business card that read, "Malcolm Edwards, founder and CEO, Edwards Urban Developments, rebuilding routes one block at a time." The officer glanced down. His brow furrowed slightly as he took a step back to his vehicle. From across the street, Claire watched from behind her blinds, heart pounding. She couldn't hear the exchange, but the posture said enough. The officer was suspicious, the man was being questioned. "This is exactly why I called," she told herself. A minute passed. 2. The officer was still in the car, running the license. Malcolm remained still on the porch, sipping from his now lukewarm coffee. He didn't fidget. Didn't pace. Just waited. Finally, the officer stepped back out, but this time, the energy had shifted. He approached more quickly, sunglasses now tucked in his pocket. "Mr. Edwards," he said, clearing his throat, "apologies for the misunderstanding. Your name checks out. It looks like you own quite a few of these properties." Malcolm gave a short nod. 13 on this block." The officer adjusted his collar awkwardly. "We got a call from a neighbor. Thought it looked unusual." "I get that a lot," Malcolm said quietly. The officer hesitated. "You shouldn't have to." Malcolm didn't respond. He didn't need to. The officer offered a brief nod and walked back to his car. Claire stood frozen behind the window, eyes wide, cheeks flushed with heat. She had heard it, "You own quite a few of these properties." She watched as the man, the one she thought didn't belong, closed the door to the house gently behind him, clipboard still in hand. He didn't look around for validation. He didn't react to the attention. He simply moved on to the next house. Like a man who had every right to be there. Because he did. Claire couldn't concentrate the rest of the day. Her inbox sat ignored. The half-eaten salad wilted on her counter. The only thing she could think about was the officer's words, "Looks like you own quite a few of these properties." She'd replayed the moment a dozen times in her head. His calm posture. The way he didn't flinch, didn't panic, didn't explain himself with desperation, just quiet certainty. How did I not see it? Or rather, why did I assume the worst? As afternoon turned to evening, she sat on her porch for the first time since moving in, nursing a glass of wine. Across the street, she noticed the same man, Malcolm, still moving between properties, talking briefly to a contractor, jotting down notes, unlocking another gate. Now, everything he did made sense. Purposeful. Professional. And still, despite the heat of embarrassment rising in her chest, Claire couldn't help but watch him with growing curiosity and shame. Then came the sound she didn't expect, a soft knock on her own front door. She opened it slowly. There he was. Clipboard tucked under his arm, calm expression on his face. "Good evening," Malcolm said, polite but not overly warm. "I wanted to formally introduce myself. I'm Malcolm Edwards. I'm the developer overseeing this block's restoration." Claire's throat tightened. "Oh. Yes. I think I may have made a mistake earlier," she said, avoiding eye contact. "I'm Claire. Claire Whitman. I just moved in. I didn't realize you were the owner?" he offered, gently but clearly. She nodded, flustered. "I'm really sorry. I thought. Well, I didn't know." "That's not an excuse." Malcolm's expression softened just slightly. "People rarely do." There was a moment of silence. Not tense, just thick with unspoken truths. "I'm actually hosting a small neighborhood meet and greet next week," he said, handing her a simple, elegant flyer. "We're trying to rebuild more than buildings around here." Claire took it, her hands trembling slightly. "I'd like to come," she said quickly. "If that's all right." He nodded once. "Everyone's welcome. Even those who call the police." It wasn't cruel. It was honest. And somehow, she appreciated it more than forgiveness. As he turned to leave, Claire called out after him. "You've done something amazing here. It's beautiful." Malcolm looked back, just for a moment. "So was the neighborhood," he said. "Even before the paint." And then he walked away, clipboard in hand, leaving Claire standing in her doorway, holding a flyer, and questioning far more than just her assumptions. A week passed. Claire thought of that conversation every day, not because Malcolm had been cruel, but because he hadn't. He'd been composed, professional, graceful, and firm. She'd never been called out without being shouted at. Never been made to feel so wrong without a raised voice. That, somehow, made the guilt sharper. She spent the following days researching, not just Edward's urban developments, but Malcolm himself. His name came up in local papers, architectural blogs, and neighborhood preservation awards. A TEDx talk from 2 years ago. A photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. Quotes about generational wealth, justice, and dignity. And a familiar theme in every article: he doesn't just build homes, he rebuilds neighborhoods with history and soul. When the day of the block party arrived, Claire dressed carefully. Not flashy, but thoughtful. Comfortable jeans, soft blouse, hair neatly tied back. She even baked lemon bars, her mother's recipe, and brought them in a tray wrapped in foil. The street was transformed. String lights hung between porches. Children ran with chalk and bubbles. Music played softly from a Bluetooth speaker, blending R&B and old-school soul with the laughter of neighbors. Every race, every age, laughing, talking, eating barbecue from a smoking grill operated by 2 older men who cracked jokes and called everyone cousin. Claire felt nervous stepping into it. She didn't know anyone, and she feared she'd be remembered not as the new girl but as the one who called the cops. But then she saw Malcolm, standing beneath a large sycamore, speaking with a group of teens and a local pastor. His energy wasn't performative. He didn't hold court. He listened. Nodded. Asked questions. Like he always had time. He noticed her. She waved, tentative. He nodded. A quiet, neutral welcome. No smile, not yet. That was fair. Throughout the evening, neighbors introduced themselves. A woman from 3 doors down who lived here for 20 years. A young couple who just bought a house Malcolm had renovated. A retired jazz musician who told Claire that man over there saved this block from becoming another strip mall. By the time the sun began to set, Claire felt something she hadn't expected: belonging. Toward the end of the evening, Malcolm stood on the porch of the corner house and tapped the glass gently. Conversations paused. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady. "This block means something. Not just because of the houses, but because of the people. Old and new. Black, white, brown. Young and old. You all matter here." He looked over the crowd, his eyes passing briefly over Claire. "I didn't invest in this neighborhood to change it. I invested so it could keep its soul. And that only works if we build it together." Applause rose. Claire clapped, her palms tingling. As the crowd began to mingle again, Malcolm stepped down from the porch and passed near her. She didn't reach out, just looked up at him and said sincerely, "Thank you. For more than just the homes." He looked at her, held the moment, and said simply, "Keep showing up." Then he moved on. And for the first time since moving in, Claire believed that maybe, just maybe, she could. It had been 2 months since the block party. And something in Claire had shifted, not in the obvious, performative way that social media loved to capture, but quietly, daily, and uncomfortably. She began to see the world through a different lens. Not a new one, it had always been there. She had just never chosen to look through it. She noticed how people tensed when a group of young black teens walked past, even if they were just laughing, just existing. She noticed how store employees followed certain customers more closely. How neighbors warned her about renters when what they really meant was non-white. But most importantly, she noticed how often she was silent. Malcolm hadn't scolded her, hadn't demanded penance or some dramatic apology. Instead, he had let her see. That was more powerful than shame. So she started speaking up. Gently, but firmly. When another neighbor scoffed about the changing demographics, Claire said, "Change doesn't mean loss, unless you resist it." When a coworker joked about ghetto areas, she didn't laugh along. When her mother asked over dinner, "Do you feel safe in that neighborhood?" Claire replied, "I feel more awake there than I ever did in the suburbs." She volunteered for the neighborhood committee, donated to the youth center Malcolm helped reopen, sat in rooms she once would have avoided, rooms where she wasn't the majority, where the conversations weren't about comfort but truth. One day, while jogging past one of Malcolm's newer renovation sites, she slowed as she noticed a mural going up. Bright colors, strong brushstrokes, black and brown faces, fists holding blueprints and books. And right at the center, in bold lettering, "We don't just rebuild homes. We reclaim futures." The artist stepped back to admire her work. Claire watched from the sidewalk, heart full. She didn't try to make the moment about herself. She didn't insert a comment or ask for recognition. She just stood there, breathing it in. Claire had once called the police on a man who had been building her future while she feared him for walking near it. And now, she was finally starting to understand what it meant to deserve the place she lived in. Not by ownership, but by participation. 6 months later, the block looked different. Not because of gentrification, Malcolm had been careful about that. He kept rent affordable for longtime residents, partnered with local businesses, and opened a shared community workspace instead of leasing to a corporate chain. He didn't want to erase the past, he wanted to fortify it. And it was working. Porches buzzed with conversation. Kids rode bikes down sidewalks without fear. The bakery reopened. The corner lot, once overgrown and forgotten, was now a garden maintained by volunteers. Claire was one of them. On a warm Saturday morning, a dedication ceremony was held at the newly finished Edwards Community Center, a project Malcolm had personally funded and designed, in honor of his late grandfather who once lived on that very block. The mayor spoke. So did a local reverend. But the speech everyone waited for was Malcolm's. He stood at the podium in his usual understated way, no suit, no fanfare. Just a rolled-up shirt, a clipboard tucked under his arm. "When I was a kid," he began, "this street raised me. Not just the houses, the people. But over time, we lost more than buildings. We lost trust. We lost space. We lost voice." He paused. "I came back not to fix it, but to help it breathe again." Applause rose, not thunderous, but heartfelt. Malcolm's eyes scanned the crowd. His gaze met Claire's. This time, he smiled. After the ceremony, she walked over, offering him a paper cup of lemonade. "You did it," she said softly. "We did," he corrected. They stood in silence for a moment, watching kids play tag on the grass that used to be a vacant lot filled with broken glass. Claire exhaled. "I never apologized properly for that day." Malcolm turned to her, but shook his head gently. "You don't owe me words. You've shown up. That's more than most ever do." He reached into his pocket and handed her something, a small, wooden keychain in the shape of the neighborhood, carved with the word home. "We're forming a residence board," he added. "You should be on it." Claire held the keychain in her hand, speechless. Later that evening, as porch lights flicked on and music floated through the block like wind, Claire looked out from her steps. It wasn't just a nice neighborhood now, it was a shared one. Real. Complicated. Full of history, pain, growth. And pride. And no one, not even her, would ever mistake who belonged again. Because everyone here had earned their place. Especially the man she once thought didn't.